Welcome everyone, it's Chobra. Another weekend has passed, and that means another week of VCT China has wrapped up. We're already 2 weeks into the Chinese region as they started a week earlier, and that means we're starting to see some changes and improvements come through for some of these teams, while other teams might still be experimenting a bit more with the new meta. Especially in week 2, we've had a couple upsets, so for those who've missed it, let's jump right in. Now, I want to highlight 2 matches in particular, but before we talk about the matches themselves, we do also have to mention the fact that EDG announced a roster change before week 2. EDG announced that they will be calling up one of their academy players in GNE 7 up to the core roster of their Tier 1 squad. Now, this caused a lot of questions to pop up. Is someone getting benched, right? A lot of people speculated maybe it was Simon that was now in danger of being benched in place of one of these academy players now being called up, or, even further down the line. Now, none of this happened in week 2. GNE 7 did get called up to their Tier 1 roster, but he did not play at all in that week 2 match. So maybe they're ramping into Stage 2, who knows, but now we have to consider the fact that they actually lost 0-2 to Nova Esports in the opening match of week 2. 0-2 is the important part here because, okay, upsets can happen. EDG's done that before. They kind of get their reps in during the regular league and things like that. And Nova Esports is a team that a lot of people expected to start to punch above their weight here in 2025. But the fact that it was 0-2, and not only that, but the fact that nobody but Simon went positive in their kill death is a little bit crazy, because now that tells us that EDG can no longer try to just frag and trade their way out of sticky situations when some of these other teams and players are playing hot on that given day. We've always known the Chinese players in general were mechanically gifted, but Nova's one of those where they have some star players like Guang, and if they start off hot, EDG may not get that chance to get back into the game as they often do with some of their heroics even at international stages. So was this Nova being great, or was it EDG being a bit of a flop? I mean, I wouldn't really say it's either of those extremes, but a pretty healthy mix of both. I think for Nova fans, there's a lot to rejoice about here. First of all, the macro looked really clean. It looked really smooth. Anytime one player was making a movement or a choice, right? Maybe they're taking action, they're throwing utility, they're peeking out. Other teammates are there to trade, or they're starting to push out or pull back from a different part of the map. It all seemed very fluid, which indicates to me that regardless of if they talk a lot or little in comms, that the comms were clean and that they were all on the same page. They also seem to have done a lot of their good homework because they picked Ascent against EDG, and Ascent was never really a favorite pick of EDG's, but on top of that, Ascent, of course, just went through map changes, the meta shifting, EDG was still coming back from Masters Bangkok. This all pointed to a little bit of an advantage for Nova Esports, and they used it very well. Nova picked the Yoru Teho Breach on Ascent as well. I wasn't quite convinced, but the way they played it looked really good. Abusing that Teho Breach for the explosive kind of set plays, the executes, the retakes, things like that. Obviously, those reinforced doors now really don't mean a thing when you have Teho salvos that can break them instantly. They utilized all parts of that to their advantage, and the Yoru, which was played by Obi-Wan in this game, was being used quite well in terms of just pure space creation and info gathering. On the flip side, you go over to Fracture, which was EDG's pick, but this wasn't the first time we're seeing it. They showcased the solo Waylay composition last week in week 1. And while, yeah, I guess they were the most successful team with the solo Waylay in week 1, that doesn't really say much because the bar was pretty low. And Nova Esports came through once again with some good prep, recognizing how that comp was meant to be played. And if they just kind of let the util combos go through after that, it's just an aim duel. And they were able to have that advantage whenever they were able to group up better, use their util, save their util for things like that. And Nova Esports is able to close it out. I also think it was good that Guang just played Sentinel only. It just seems like he was able to get a hot start on that day. He was able to kind of play that same position and role, same tone, right? You have the same purpose on both maps. That seemed to work really well for him, but it wasn't just Guang. A lot of those players were starting off on a hot streak right off the bat against the players of EDG, and CB actually tops the board at the end of the day with a very, very solid kill that scoreline. So all things for Nova Esports, great. The fact that they got a 2-0 upset, even better, because now they're in a pretty solid position to secure their spot into the playoffs and maybe even a higher seed going into the playoffs. But for EDG, I don't think you should be concerned, are they going to be in trouble for playoffs or anything like that? But the big question now is, okay, what is the plan? you're trying to figure out the meta for yourselves. That's excusable. I think that's fine. But is there going to be a roster change in stage 1? Is it supposed to be a ramp up into stage 2? Does this result change anything for you? I think these are the questions that are probably going through the management's head as well. And I do wonder, because as someone who is a big fan of the way Simon plays and the way he uses util specifically for Kong, I get why you might want a roster change, but I also think that would result in a bigger shift in how the team plays. And I think if you were just looking to upgrade firepower, this match against Nova proves that that can't be the reliable source anymore of your victories. And I think this goes for any region. No longer do you have a single team that's just outright always going to win in firepower. That just doesn't exist anymore in 2025. So I think EDG is going to have to start to consider, okay, if we are bringing in, one of our younger players, is that because we think that helps us in changing our style for the better, helping us find our own color once again in the currently very util, exec heavy, combo heavy, very aggressive meta that's going around all around the regions. The other match I wanted to highlight was actually on the last day of VCT China here in week 2, and it was Titan Esports Club versus Dragon Ranger Gaming, or TEC versus DRG. Now, TEC, or Tech, is, as we talked about last week, one of those teams where they've got some hype players and some fan favorites, but they're just not that consistent anymore. They don't seem that reliable, whereas DRG came out strong. Vukashu is still fragging, and they're working around him quite reliably, but then you still have Spirit Z1, who is able to now take on that duelist role, and he's being a very good space creator for the team. I was pretty convinced that DRG kind of locked themselves in for the top 3 of China one way or another. It turns out nothing is constant in China, because Tech gets a 2-1 upset against DRG. And this is an upset. No matter how you cut it, you have to believe that this is an upset. Because all things pointed, especially coming into week 1, that DRG was just looking stronger, whereas Tech, they'll have moments, but it just didn't quite come together. But this Tech looked different. I mean, for one, Hao Dong was just pumping up his teammates after every round victory, after any, hype plays or, heroic plays, things like that. Even on the first map, which they did eventually end up losing on Lotus very, very closely, 13-11. But Hao Dong was making sure to keep the energy up, and they were laughing. They were really pumping each other up throughout the entire best of 3. But on top of that, they looked quite decisive. And I think that was one of the things where, the round setup might have been good, but they didn't quite come together, or you're relying on somebody getting a quick frag, and that just doesn't quite happen, right? The fragging power is very inconsistent. That wasn't true either. We should also note that this was kind of that revenge match from Luke, now on Tech, going up against his old team of DRG. And this seems to have lit a fire in him, because he knew exactly when and where to be to get those frags, but he wasn't overheating as much. There were some moments, but not as many. And this all resulted in Tech not having this domino effect of one person falling and then another peaking, and eventually it's just one person trying to go for a clutch. It was a lot of good team moments for Tech, which resulted in a close map on map 1, but then a 13-9 just solid victory on Fracture, but an absolute stomp 13-3 on Icebox. Can I also mention that they moved off of the solo Waylay on Icebox? For any other teams that were still planning on trying it, thinking we can make it work on Icebox, just figure something else out. We don't really see it working. Go back to the Jet. Titan Esports gets a 13-3 victory. I think that's all the proof we need. But obviously, the Waylay, they didn't exactly like what they were doing with it. They go back to the Jet. They still have the Gecko Taeho, which I think is a very, very strong combination on Icebox. So Tech making those quick adjustments as well week to week. They're also one of the teams that is actively picking this deadlock a decent amount. The deadlock now having been changed, with the GravNet being the signature now on cooldown, and then you have to purchase the barrier mesh. And I want to give props to Abo. Abo might be one of the players I'm kind of keeping my eye on here from week 2, because I think the deadlock utility in general was used quite well. But on top of that, when he was playing that Cypher, he was fragging out 24-14 on Fracture, a plus 10 kill differential. So really pulling his weight. Honestly, big round of applause to both Abo and Coco as those two players that really shined and able to carry Tech over that finish line, and making sure that they're also just able to stomp out that last map against DRG. And if they're able to frag like that, I think, Hao Dong being a little inconsistent still maybe now and then, it doesn't matter as much. Maybe you're not lifting a trophy, but you are now a contender to go into playoffs. On the flip side, Vukushu and DRG, I mean, Vukushu wasn't able to just completely crush them. And again, similar to the EDG game, I think it's partly that Tech wasn't backing down. They weren't starting to play scared against Vukushu. They weren't giving all the space, allowing him to just get the 1v1s that he wants. They were taking the fight to him. They were fighting him as a group. I mean, they were making sure that they weren't giving these free kills as often. And I think when that starts to fall, DRG, maybe similar to EDG, they don't have those rounds where they can kind of get by and get back into the game, maybe maintain their econ, whatever else it might be. That's all a domino and snowball effect. So I don't think it changes too much for DRG. I still think they have the firepower to solidly make it to an international this year, but maybe it is still a little bit all over the place when it comes to, I mean, quite frankly, all of the placings here in VCT China. A quick review at the remaining games. I think result-wise, there wasn't anything too shocking. FPX versus Tyloo, they do drop a map. They dropped that icebox where Tyloo actually came with just really good prep, had really solid reads against FPX and their choice of playing with a lot of those 1-4 and the number games and the rotations. So that wasn't too good, but they regroup instantly on the Haven, win 13-4. So if anything, it's like, okay, Tyloo had a good moment, and FPX may not be super dominant and comfortable yet, but I think FPX is still pretty solid for a top 2 spot, a contender in the top 2, and they should only get better from here on out. XLG, Shilai Gaming, gets a 2-0 victory against All Gamers. I think anything outside of that would have been cause for concern. So XLG is still kind of a contender to, be in playoffs and maybe have an upset even there, but we'll have to keep our eye on them. Wolves Esports beats Trace Esports 2-0. Now, on paper, I guess this is an upset if you're only looking at the team names, but we saw what Trace did last week. I mean, this was expected. If anything, I'm going to be honest, I'm mildly disappointed that one of the maps went to overtime. I mean, the way Trace was playing in week 1, and quite frankly, it didn't look that much more convincing in week 2, Wolves should not be struggling to close out these maps or get these victories here against Trace Esports. But the fact that you're letting Trace Esports get 6 rounds in a row to come back into overtime is a little bit concerning. So I think Wolves, obviously, they're continuing to prove that they can fight, but they're not organized enough to really be a convincing, consistent factor here in VCT China. And I think next week's match with them and XOG is going to be very telling, but we won't get ahead of ourselves. And last but not least, Billy Gaming versus JDG. Another classic story of a fake comeback. JDG brings it back in map 2 on Icebox. It was a messy game. JDG was crushing BLG, and it was still very messy. And they took it to map 3 on Fracture, where it continued to be a little bit nonsensical until Billy just locked in on the attacking half and just cruised through, getting 9 rounds in a row to close out that best of 3. So BLG, they're probably that team that's still kind of the gatekeeper to the internationals for China. They'll win the matches they're supposed to, even if it looks a little shaky. They'll probably lose the matches they're supposed to down the road. It did look like on Icebox that they were quite shaken and a little bit tilted, but I guess the good news, the silver lining, is they brought it back and they were able to lock in for map 3. As for JDG, I honestly don't know if you can even really get a silver lining out of this. I mean, there were some good individual performances on Icebox, but when you're winning 13-5, it's hard not to. Zian did have a lot of crispy shots. I think JDG was hitting some nice shots on Icebox, but outside of that, it's not like Stu is hard carrying any map as well anymore. It does seem like JDG is just kind of there. And I wonder if they can really figure something out for themselves moving forward, because we're not really seeing a hard identity, but just having pretty decent fragging power isn't going to cut it in VCT anymore. So where does that leave us? Well, kind of an interesting place in terms of the scoreboards. FPX is 2-0, so leading that group, and they should be pretty safe for the playoffs, all things considered. But DRG, EDG, Nova, and Tech now all tied 1-1. So we don't have as many 0-2 teams maybe as we expected in VCT China, so it's still anybody's game. I don't expect EDG to be upset anymore here in the groups, but we will have to wait and see. And if they do get upset another time, the seedings may get very crazy for playoffs moving forward. But I think Nova, because their one win is against EDG, not only do they have the confidence boost, but as long as they win, 2 other matches that they're supposed to, I think they should be okay moving forward. Whereas DRG, yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of a cause for concern because, Tech now challenged you, and that might come to a head-to-head, quite frankly, if Tech gets another upset. So DRG will have to make sure that they are locked in for the rest of their matches if they want to make sure that they're in a good spot going into playoffs. On the other side for Group Omega, Wolves and BLG 2-0, just considering how they looked in Week 1, I don't think that's surprising at all, but I think it's very good news for Wolves because now you've already bought yourself some time to probably comfortably get into playoffs, and then you can continue to build up and hopefully make more improvements down the road. For Trace, I mean, I think you're safe just because we're not really seeing JDG or all gamers make a big run for the playoffs. But if you are 4th seed going into the playoffs, then you start in the lower bracket. And I would be a little concerned for Trace if they can't get it together before that and start in the upper bracket. Looking ahead for Week 3, I've got my eyes on XLG versus Wolves. I think that's going to be a very telling match for both teams. And not just the win-loss, but how it gets there. The context of it, the play style, right? Is any one team actually able to look better than the other, just like clearly as a team? Or does it come down to fragging power on the day? Things like that. So keep your eye on that match because that could tell us that Wolves might even be contending for top 3. Or it could also maybe indicate that XLG is still in the running to be kind of that, upset underdog Ascension team here in 2025. That's going to be it for this week's recap of VCT China. If you enjoyed the content and you'd like to know more about both VCT China and Pacific, make sure you subscribe to the channel and let me know down in the comments below what team you're looking forward to here in 2025 from the Eastern side. That's going to be it for this one. I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good one.